Hey friends, I am Rebecca Allen Jones, the great-granddaughter of A.A. Allen and the executive director here at Miracle Valley Oasis Center. I wanted to share with you, I've had a lot of questions over the past year about what is going on with the status of the historic Miracle Valley Training Center, often these days referred to as Miracle Valley Bible College. And so I want to answer all of those in a kind of compilation here, and I will try and get through all of these questions with brevity, but I wanted to make sure that you have this resource as your place for those questions. So first of all, who owns this property? And to be clear, which property are we talking about? So we're talking about 37.5 acres out of an original 2,400 acres that was in Miracle Valley. My great-grandfather founded the town of Miracle Valley, and it had farming, agriculture, dairy. It had all sorts of this farming and ranching, and they would actually take, horses, break them in, cattle, all of that stuff to kind of run the operation and to help raise funds for the A.A. Allen Revivals Incorporated ministry that was a tent ministry across the world. But right there at the headquarters was also the publishing house and all of that. So those core buildings that were operating as the historic buildings for the classroom, for the Bible classes, and all of the tabernacle, the church building that was used for all of those big camp meetings. And we've got the old dorms and apartments, all of that kind of stuff there. There was the core headquarter buildings. Those were all built on land that now is 37.5 acres. So who owns them? For that answer, we need to go back to how did it get out of the hands and of A. Allen, and that is really a video for another time. But in brevity, it left the hands of the ministry relatively quickly after my great-grandfather died in 1970. And so within a few years, Don Stewart, who had become his predecessor after he had passed, had kind of closed things down and handed it over to another organization that had a Bible college there for a while. It went through several different hands, and in the process, it ended up in the hands in 2014 of an organization called YouthPad Inc., led by Louis Betancourt. Now, Louis Betancourt, his brother had been a member of that Bible college that had been a part of their, so he had heard about the property through that, no doubt. And over time, he had become interested in acquiring the property, and he did in 2014. I have looked through all the documents. I am a historian and a real avid researcher. I'm writing the biography of my great-grandfather's life and ministry. And so I did look through all of the records of the history of the property and continue to, out of my own interest for learning about how things have proceeded. And one of the questions is, who owns the property and why do they own it? And right now, the state owns it, and it is in the care of the Board of Supervisors of the county. So that means that the Board of Supervisors of Cochise County in Arizona, in the United States, have the care of the property on behalf of the state of Arizona. Well, how did it get there? Because the organization that had it before, YouthPad Inc., they acquired it with a $200,000 tax bill still owing. And that was there because it actually had been taken from a previous organization, Melvin Harder Ministries, for a variety of different reasons that had been taken from this organization, and then that organization has been taken over by the state. For a variety of reasons, it had come into a point where it was no longer being operated by a nonprofit. And the organization that had it at the time, the company, was not paying their taxes. And Lewis comes along with YouthPad Inc. in 2014 and acquires the property along with this $200,000 tax bill, and was required to pay that off before he would be able to apply to become eligible for that nonprofit status of being tax free for property. That doesn't get applied to a property unless you are fully up on your taxes. I've seen the forms myself, and it's just one of those things. So this meant that he had to catch up on that before he could no longer have to pay taxes. And it was not something that happened. And so over the years, from 2014 up until 2019, there was this tax bill that was accruing. And in 2019, of the 7 parcels involved in this arrangement, 2 of them were removed from that situation, and what was left was 5 parcels. So these 5 parcels had the 37.5 acres on them. And in 2021, in March, they went ahead and took the property from him after these years of not paying taxes, and they called it quits on having any grace on the situation, so they actually acquired the property. And that meant at that point that there was $572,000 in taxes, back taxes that were owed. So that answers the question of who has it. Now, what has happened since then? When they took over the property, they immediately had the director of development, Dan Coxworth, have a look at things and on behalf of the county be in charge of just checking out if there was anything that needed to be done to prepare it for auction. Dan Coxworth believed, as somebody who firmly is loving the concept of development, because that is his job to do so, he felt that getting somebody in there who could develop the land would be a plus. And although he has found it to be difficult to believe in nonprofit organizations being able to achieve this because of the history of people actually taking roofs off and not replacing them and the likes, it has created this environment where he felt it was necessary to create a property ready for developers to take over the land. And in the process of this, the very first discussion that came up amongst this was the sheriff making a brief question as to whether or not this property would be ideal for the jail that they were looking to put in. And they needed a new county jail, and they thought this property would be good because of the aquifer that runs through that area. And the reality is that it's a terrible place to put a jail. It's a place that stands for freedom. It shouldn't be a place that stands for being imprisoned. And it also is a place that happens to be very far away from different things except for the border of Mexico. It's a few miles away from the border of Mexico, and it's about 20 minutes either direction from larger places, which means that anytime a prisoner needs to go to a hospital or anything like that, a court date, hearing, any of that stuff meant that there would be a prisoner transfer, which would actually cause opportunities for people to be broken out of jail, for jail breaks, all of that kind of stuff to go on. And so it's, it's a quiet rural community that doesn't need to have a jail there. There's so many reasons why that was a bad idea. And they eventually heard the voice of the people reaching out and saying, please don't do that. And they chose against it and chose another location, which was wonderful. But Dan Coxworth did want to pursue development being an interesting thing to people, so they pursued that, and into 2022, they did a few things on the property and eventually started to get prepared for putting it to auction, but their ducks were not in a row. So in 2022, even though they'd taken it previously, they did not put it up for auction. In 2023, just weeks after I had begun having conversations in December of 2022 with the county, they privately were having these conversations with me about the property, and they came to the understanding that they believed, on the advice of Dan Coxworth, that there needed to be some demolition work done on the property. And this is not necessarily a problem. These buildings do not need to be demolished. These were county workers who did not understand construction. My family comes from generations of construction with facilities just like this. And we knew that these properties were in good shape, but we went a step further and reached out to the people who actually contracted to put the steel in and all of that kind of stuff, because I have archives right behind me that are the original contracts for the steel and things like that for the tabernacle. So I called up those companies that were still open and asked them about what they could say about the work that they had put in there. And I reached out to engineers and showed them what things looked like as well. And they all agreed, without trespassing onto the property, everything was done according to the book. They all agreed that these buildings are able to be saved, but they do need some serious work, and soon. So this brought us to a point where we needed to talk to them about letting go of the property, because they had been kind of spending a great deal of time on this, and the property was deteriorating under their watch. So I was speaking with Dan Coxworth and these people about keeping the property safe, and they were agreeing on paper, and suddenly it hits the news that they are taking bids for demolition right behind my back, even though I had already shown them the laws and they had acknowledged that they understood that it would be illegal for them to do demolition. The news picked up on it and made it front page news, much to Dan Coxworth's dismay. And so I flew out from England, where I had been arranging our move to the States, and to be here for this. And so we went. I spent 6 weeks here, away from my husband Dan, as we just fought on this topic. And one of the things we did is we went to the State Historic Preservation Office, who declared this property, after a number of weeks of going back and forth, that this property is in fact eligible for the National and State Register on 2 of the 4 counts, which is very historic and unheard of. They asked that we focus on 1 count, and I couldn't do it because I knew it was historic. So I shared with them 2, and they felt that both categories were in fact making this an eligible property. So therefore, this is a highly eligible property for listing on the National Register. Now, that doesn't protect it from being demolished right now, but because it's owned by the state and therefore the county have a responsibility, according to the laws, to steward properties that are eligible for listing on the National Register, so that they don't become in disrepair, or they don't have anything happen to them that would cause problems. So this has been kind of a back and forth with them while they've been holding on to the property, where they have repeatedly discussed, okay, we want to demolish another building, we want to demolish all of them, we're taking bids, and no, you're not, and all of that. And in the process, many of you have signed petitions which have been invaluable in making our voices heard, and they have chosen not to demolish. So this brings us up to September last year. They chose to, and this is 2023, in September, they chose to put it up for auction, and we intended to purchase that auction. And just as the auction was beginning, just a couple of days before, God spoke clearly to me and said, do not get involved in this. And we started getting words from other people saying, do not get involved in this. And so I actually approached the county and told them, look, I believe that there are bad actors that are going to show up to this. That is a phrase. It's not meant to be derogatory towards anyone. It's an actual phrase that's used by the county when people participate in an auction and they don't intend to purchase. So what they were experiencing was people were then going to be participating but not actually purchasing. And this was something that I called out to them. I said, I believe this is about to happen. We don't want to participate in something. We have a responsibility to our donors and the people in our sphere not to purchase something on the basis that people are, skyrocketing a price. And actually what the laws state is that $572,000 worth of taxes owed. If the auction were to exceed that amount that was owed in back taxes, everyone would be paid off, and what's left isn't profit to the government. It actually goes back to the Youth Pad Inc. organization, which was and is led by Louis Betancourt. So it is in the interest of our organization to be wise with and steward the finances, but we obviously want to secure the property. We care about this and it is really important to us, but we were not willing to do that, and we felt that God was putting it on our hearts to be careful with that. So we were, and we made them aware what we thought might happen. And what ended up happening was that there were 3 different bidders that bid up on each other. None of them had intentions of purchasing, or did go ahead and purchase, I should say. And also on top of that, there was also this issue where there was a problem with information about the people who were involved in the bidding process, having their information from the county side being leaked publicly by an individual in the community. And this data was not available to anyone. We were signed up as bidders, and our information, we could not see this information as a bidder, but this individual was leaking information that was not readily available and could have only been given or hacked. So we were grateful that we had not participated, and the county did apologize for privately saying, look, we recognize that we didn't get this perfectly right, and we want people to have confidence in this process, and so we need to look at doing this differently. We can't do it right now because the laws stipulate that it needs to happen right in that window in September each year. So they decided not to sell it over the counter and to put it into an auction process for this year. We did make a over-the-counter offer to them, which they did not respond to, and we have subsequently made a second one, which they have also not responded to, but we are in the process of continuing to discuss with them what options they have, because it is very expensive for the county to put on an auction, and it's not necessary if they have a buyer ready to go. So what we want is for God to have his way with this property, and we believe that we can steward it with integrity, but we want that in his timing, and we knew that the timing wasn't right, and so of course that was disappointing, but here we are in 2024. So what happened is in March of 2024, they brought forward discussing what to do with the property, and Dan Coxworth, the director of development, mentioned that he would like to spend some money on the property, but they did not have a budget for it, and so he asked Tom Crosby, one of the supervisors, the one that is in charge of that region, to come and have a walkthrough. And the two of them, not as contractors, felt that they didn't have hope for the property, and so they were in discussion about this, and Tom made what he felt was a gracious offer for $70,000 out of his discretionary fund to be used to help, quote unquote, demolish and clean up the property. So that was done, and the property was actually, we went through the process of saying no to that. They agreed that it should proceed with having this money spent. And after the meeting was done, they all agreed internally that absolutely, I don't know what happened, but they all recorded that they believed no demolition could happen and a new vote wouldn't have to happen in order for that to take place. That's not the meeting I sat in, but it's what the Lord ordained. And so they spent the $70,000 before the tax year for the fiscal year was done in order to clean up the property without demolishing anything other than to cave in some old foundations which had already gone into disrepair and were not an actual structure. So none of the structures were hurt or harmed, but $70,000 was done. So this meant at this point that during their ownership, they have actually spent $200,000 cleaning up this property. And that's money that they see well spent to help try and bring development to the region. But when they bring it to auction, their hope is to get 572,000, but they don't expect that they will, so they bring in a lower amount. Now last year, that amount was a minimum bid of 325,000. And this year, it may be more, it may be less, it could be a completely different number, and that will be decided. So there is 2 dates in August where they could announce this. It's August 13th or the 27th, and I believe that they will announce it on the 27th of August. The 27th of August is just a few days before September, and they cannot hold the auction in August, and they have to start that auction within 2 weeks of it going ahead. The laws are very complex and specific. So what this means is that likely on the 27th of August, they will announce what dates in September within that 2-week period and how much and all that kind of stuff will be in that meeting. And then in September, there will be a 2-week window where this auction is taking place. It could be that it falls partly into August, but it mostly needs to be in September. And then this would mean that likely the 12th of November would be the date where a title transfer would take place. That's the date range where they transfer titles on all of the winning auction dates that have happened. So where this leaves us now is a need to acquire, but we don't need to just acquire. The auctioneer made me aware that they have a 6-month grace period after acquiring a property to get all of the hazards sorted out. That means things like asbestos and dangers. All of that needs to be sorted out within 6 months, or they shut everything down and make it very complex to deal with. So they have a bit of a grace period there, which means that we cannot just fundraise in order to ensure that we're prepared for an auction, which we did, and everybody was very generous last year, and we've got money set aside ready for this. But we also, we can't divulge how much because this is an auction, but we need more because we're going to be ready for auction and for restoration so that we can dive right in. And in the process of it, we've got other really exciting things which we can share in other videos that are also becoming available, and amazing stuff happening. This brings you up to snuff with all the details of this last year, who owns it, what's going on, all the things. I hope this has been useful and interesting to you. I'm sorry it takes a bit to explain these things, but I want you to know what it is that's going on, and I want to ask you to partner with us. This is a once in history moment. This is this moment or not. These buildings can't stand to sit for another year. They've had vandalism in the last year. We need to look after these buildings, and we need to do it now. And we want to, in good conscience, go into that auction ready for restoration. And we need to ask you to partner with us to make that happen. So would you partner with us as we go into this next season confidently in the direction of what God is calling us to? And if you can give $10, then please give $10. If you can give $100, give 100. And if you feel that you should give 1,000, 10,000, 100,000, you know what that number is that God's calling you to. And I want to ask you to be obedient. My husband and I have moved country. We've purchased a house here. We have also had the organization purchase property last year right there in the center of town to be able to minister to the community. And we are ready not just to preserve something from the past, but to actually help steward something for the revival and the move of God that he has for this season. The things that God wants to do now, we want to be able to help support and facilitate that, and be able to be stewards for the kingdom of God in this season, and be those who can really support all that God has for us to do. But we need you to partner with us to make that happen. We've poured our own personal finances, thousands and thousands of dollars into this, and we are giving our best, and we ask you to do the same with us. Pour out your best with us, and let's gather together for revival and for God's purposes in this season. Let's boldly go in the direction of what He is calling us to in this season. We look forward to partnering with you.